Dr. Mchangizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about how it is the case that much of the world came to believe something that was astronomically wrong in terms of the dangers of COVID, the degree to which they think these interventions work. This was a kind of mass hysteria, the kinds of things I've been talking about in the last 20 or more videos. But I want you to give some slack and try to understand when these mass movements happen, and they happen at smaller scales many times, and they happen in this case worldwide. Try to understand, by virtue of understanding why they happen, it changes how you blame individuals, it changes how you potentially solve the problem in the future. So I want to get clear on why people believe what they believe. So the reason that we believe what we believe, you at first might think, well, we're like little scientists all the time everywhere we go. We're looking at the evidence, the rational evidence, and we just pile up these pieces of evidence together and we come to some kind of conclusion. We're acting like logicians, we're acting like sort of careful philosophers or scientists. And that's really not at all how humans do it. The way that we really do it is actually steeped with emotional expressions. It's actually looking at the high reputation people around our network and seeing what they're saying. And you sample those things and you pull it all together. It has nothing to do with the kinds of logic and scientific principles that we might pretend that we in fact do. Now we do some of that, but that's usually after the fact. We come to believe something by these more fundamental instinctual mechanisms that come out of being a social animal. And after the fact, we sometimes create stories for why we believe them. Now sometimes those stories could even be true, but that's not why we came to believe it in the first place. So let me just give you an example. Suppose that I, in cognitive sciences, do this particular experiment. I present to you two pictures side by side, and I say, okay, which one is more attractive? And you point to one. You say A or B, and I put them aside, and I give you then two more. And you do this 50 times, and so you've got all these ratings of one picture versus another you thought was more attractive, of people that they're looking at. Now, after the fact, I know which ones you liked more than which others, and I then present to you each of these pairs again, and I lie to you half the time. I say, actually, so you thought, remember how you thought this one was more attractive? I want you to give me some of the reasons why. Now, I'm lying to you. This is not the one that you thought was more attractive. You thought the other one was more attractive. But when you give your reasons, because you've at this point forgot, when you give your reasons, you actually give reasons for why this other person is more attractive. They're, brown hair, and you actually give reasons that apply to that person. So these justifications are coming up afterwards. In fact, you're justifying something that you didn't even think was the case. And this is true for almost all of the kinds of things that we humans do. Now, the reasons that we believe what we believe outside of an attractiveness context like that experiment has two parts in some sense. And it's a very complicated story, the kind of thing that my colleague Tim Barber and I are working on. And our next book, which is about the Rosetta Stone of emotional expressions, is the first part of this sort of story. The reason emotional expressions work as an orator is because they allow me to push chips of reputation on the table. Rather than a person that just wants to make their argument in a flat, monotonic voice, and so here are the reasons that I believe what I am saying, no crowd will get stirred by that kind of orator. What makes a speech rousing is the emotional expressions. It's the kind of confidence that the speaker is able to emit. And people say, yeah, he really believes what he's saying. I believe it too. But what does that actually get cashed out as? What that is, that kind of confidence, is that that speaker, who already might have high reputation, this why he or she's speaking, has pushed a lot of chips out onto the table, like in a poker game. Those reputation chips have been pushed out, which is why if it turns out the speaker's wrong later, he'll be humiliated. Humiliation is just losing the reputation chips that you pushed in onto the table when you find out that you're wrong. What makes an orator worth listening to and worth following and worth believing is because you say, yeah, not only do they have high reputation, but they're pushing all of these chips in, and thus they're staking something. They're putting something at stake. Someone who's just doing something in flat affect isn't doing the same thing. They're not evincing how much stake they're putting in. The more trash talky the orator, the more they're pushing in, and the more you're like, okay, hey, they really must believe it because look how much trash talk they're doing. It may sound wispy, and emotional expressions may sound non-scientific, but they're exactly the kinds of mechanisms that we need to be able to both say things and put the cred in that lets you know that I'm not joking around. The reason that people are high reputation is because they've been able to do that over time and build reputations. They keep saying, here's what I think and here's how I am, and they're turned out to be right. And when they're found out to be right, their reputations went up. So the other part of why you believe what you believe is because you're hearing high reputation people say those things. And you hear many high reputation people say those things. And with putting further reputation at stake. So when this happened back in March, and there's not necessarily one person. It's not like there's a journalist to blame or some intellectual or academic to blame or some politician to blame. It happens slowly. People are afraid. And remember, fear, something we talked about in an earlier moment, fear is infectious. And when you're afraid of something, you start to see more fear, and this spreads. And so the first grain of sand in an avalanche isn't so much the cause. In some sense, it's the cause of the avalanche. But all it really did was just fall 1 millimeter down. It didn't really do anything. You can't really put much blame on it. Same thing. It doesn't really matter where the first push was towards this. It's positive feedback. The journalists put more fright into the people, who put more fright into the government, which then puts out edicts which scare more of the journalists and so forth. And this positive feedback loop happens. And when that positive feedback loop happens, the high reputation folks, they're hearing all of this independent, seemingly independent information, which determines what they believe, which is that, yeah, this is super dangerous. We've got to lock down everything and overturn society. And then, of course, you hear the same thing from all of your supposedly independent thinkers, and then you emit it to others with high confidence, and these things create a big positive feedback loop. The reason that people believe what will turn out, and is already turning out to be, in fact, deeply false things, is in some sense not their fault. The reason it's not their fault is, can you really expect folks to go back to first principles and find these data themselves? The reason that all of us, every single one of us, believe what we believe is mostly determined by exactly these network of high reputation people and the kind of emotional expressions that are distributed between us. That's why understand all political movements in this regard, in this light. It'll help you better understand what's going on so that you treat other people with more tolerance and understanding rather than treating them as evil folk who are trying to go after you. That's not the right way. Part of the reason that I'm doing many of these science moments is try to get folks to understand the mechanisms underlying these sorts of movements and let you be potentially more insulated so that you're not spreading on bad information, but also helping you understand the degree to which your political opponents aren't your enemies. They're not evil. Here's what's going on in their own mind, and by understanding that, perhaps we can do better together. Thank you.